welcome from me as well. Not too much by way of introduction, really. I think I'm probably best placed to hand over to Simon, who's going to give us our opening keynote and also hopefully set the agenda for the work we're going to be doing here this afternoon.
Okay, thank you, and hello to everyone here. It's good to see you all again, and hi to everyone's watching this a little later time online. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background about what's happening in the industry, the trends, and what's happening in the broadcast market and the satellite broadcast market as we introduce our talks about next generation video networks. Now, there's a lot going on, of course, in the way people consume video. If you look at the viewing habits compared to a few years ago, where people just sat in the living room watching TV, things are very different now. There's a lot of streaming on-demand content, and the usage is soaring, especially amongst the younger demographics. They watch video, streaming video on their tablets, on their smartphones, on their laptops, much more than the older generation that still tends to watch the video on the traditional TV screens. But there's also changes in patterns. There's a massive rise in binge viewing. So a lot of people used to watch one program every week, and now a lot of people watch a whole evening series of things. For instance, 87% of subscription video on demand viewing is for binge viewing once a week. So there's a big change in the way people are actually consuming video content, which of course is driving the way that this TV and this video has to be provided to those viewers. What is also happening is that the viewing habits are changing very much depending on the content type. Before, again, there was a TV, and whether you watch sports or news or your soap opera or your favorite series or films, you had the television to watch on, unless, of course, you went to the cinema. But now the content type is very much driving the future evolutions of television. If you look at the live premium sports market, this is the thing, the rights and the monetization of premium sports, that is what is driving all the pay TV platforms. That is the reason why people buy BT Sports and Sky in the UK. That's why beIN Sports in Qatar have invested so many 500 millions for English Premier League rights in the Middle East. So when it comes to linear TV, one of the big things is following your team, following your country on live TV, whether it's football or whether it's Major League Hockey or whatever the sports, of course, with the World Cup, with the Olympics coming up, all those things, and live sports are one of the key drivers for linear TV and quality linear TV. So this is what's driving ultra-high definition, moving towards 4K. That's what people want. The absolute guarantee there will be no outages, no spinning little circles while they're trying to see the goal coming up and they've just missed the goal, they've just missed the wicket, they've just missed whatever it is. But of course, in other forms of content, things are very different. In short form content, short video clips, everyone's watching it from YouTube now. They just watch video clips on YouTube. On longer form content, whether it's programs or series, that's one of the reasons why Netflix is becoming so popular, why it has such a massive marketization value, where it's more than doubled since the beginning of this year, because people binge view, watch series, watch programs, to an extent on films, also on video on demand, subscription video on demand, catch up and streaming videos. You also see with news, there's a big change as well. If you think of the recent disaster in China, in Tianjin, most of the video clips you saw even on live TV were clips that have been uploaded to YouTube, that have been shown by the news broadcasters. So the way that news is reported Fast news gathering is still important, but a lot of people are catching live news breaking on Twitter and on social media, YouTube. They will then come to TV for more in-depth analysis of trying to understand the news. But the different types of content are driving the technologies into different ways. And that's something that I think is also important. Another big trend that is happening throughout the world, and this is something that is being enabled by technology and enabled by the economics of doing business. For instance, if you walk around at IBC, you see these lower cost cameras, whether it's a GoPro camera clipped onto someone's helmet or bike, whether it's the latest high definition 4K camera and computerized production and post-production. What used to cost an absolute fortune to set up a TV channel before required a whole country. If you think traditionally of public service broadcasters in Europe, BBC in UK or in the same in the Netherlands, same in Belgium or wherever, it took before almost an entire country to make it worthwhile to fund and operate a TV channel. But those things have changed now. A couple of years ago, the latest talk was about channel in a box. So you can produce, post-produce, and distribute a whole channel and set up a channel in a couple of weeks and very quickly send it out. And what this is doing is fueling an entire new infrastructure, and there's no catchy term for it, but geographically dispersed thematic channels. So what I mean by that, and you may have seen the apps, Real Madrid TV are using the Microsoft Cloud so that people that are fans of Real Madrid, that don't have to be in Spain, don't have to be in Europe, can be anywhere around, can still be part of this thematic Real Madrid TV channel, but using the cloud. The same sort of thing for expat TVs. If you go to the Middle East, of course, there are lots of expat workers from around the world, and there's a lot of thematic channels for Filipinos living in the Middle East, Sri Lankans in the Middle East. Wherever you go, the same sorts of things are happening. So different communities are watching the same channels, but they're no longer in one geographic community. That community is dispersed around the world. And for that to happen, you need the economics and you need the technology under there. And things like the advances in cloud, the lower cost distribution of content over internet, files being FTP'd everywhere, very low cost production and post techniques are some of the things that are driving this. Because it technically is possible and economically is feasible, it is happening. Because in the end, what people want is the content. You have this adage of content is king, but it is no more prevalent than now. For instance, in the UK, you have the BBC iPlayer, which is theoretically supposed to be only accessible by people living in the UK. But there are already 65 million non-UK viewers that are using VPNs to watch BBC iPlayer around the world. And 38 million of them are in China. So what people want are access to content. And they will get it via the internet using VPNs. They will get it over the top YouTube channels. They will bypass censorship. They will bypass lack of availability of channels if they can get the content they want to see. Whether it's football, whether it's their languages, their culture, their interests, they will get it. So things are changing, but this is all, of course, also impacting the economics of the broadcast business. Now, it's not new. It's something that's been happening for quite a few years already. But it is speeding up. And if you go around IBC now, you see the economics of it are changing things. It is challenging the existing broadcasters and the existing players of service providers, whether it's European public service broadcasters shedding jobs, like in Belgium, the VRT, BBC are also going to be scaling back on personnel. So the established players, broadcasters, service providers are under immense threat financial challenges, because there's a lot of newer kids on the block. The rise of Netflix, of course, is demonstrating how new entrants to the market can come on and change the order. Apple TV announced their next generation of things just a week ago. And so the old order is being challenged, and there's a lot of problems and financial risk for established players, but there's also a lot of opportunities. You see the economics of the business going on. For instance, the Amazon Web Services have just acquired Elemental with their transcoding on demand, because the cloud is more and more becoming an important element of the broadcasting infrastructure. And broadcasting as a service is becoming more important, just like we had CPU and storage as a service. And now more and more the opportunities are there for people to use the cloud, again, because it's economically feasible for accessing people throughout the world. And it's also a lot cheaper in many cases than having all the on-premises equipment and managing it yourself. We also see a lot of the impact on the broadcast businesses, again, with takeovers and mergers. For instance, Ericsson having acquired Invivio as well is one of the latest things that has happened of IBC. They've got a hole in their software-defined codecs, and they're using that as a way to challenge other competitors that are in those markets. And all of those things are indicative of what's happening in the broadcast transmission market. There's a lot of disruption to the value chain, and there's a lot of established players that are hurting badly because the economics have changed. But again, there's a lot of opportunity. And there's also opportunity for existing suppliers like satellite. Now, with EUsatcom, one of our big focuses, of course, is on satellite. And generally, the satellite is still being used and in still good shape, but due to the increased complexity in the market, it is somewhat hidden from view. But it's looking good. For instance, if you look in Europe, it's now projected that Sky Europe, as an entity, will outgrow and have a higher revenue than Liberty Global, which is primarily a cable company. Yeah? So satellite as a business of television is doing very well. Again, in the Middle East, if you look at it there, it's dominant. In many other parts of the world, both for contribution and distribution, you're talking about major opportunities. If we look towards the high definition, certainly towards sports, SES were announced in one of their recent papers that they're expecting 220 ultra-high definition channels by 2025. So there's a lot of movement on satellite, a lot of capacity that is available as well, a lot of satellites that have been launched, and in some regions they're not fully occupied yet. But there's a lot of potential business. Which comes to the point of this conference, and this diagram we have created for this component is on next generation video networks. Now, how will the broadcast transmission players tackle and manage this change in the broadcast market, the change in viewing habits, the change in the value chains? But what is happening is that broadcast networks are becoming more complex. Before, they may have been purely satellite, or they may have been terrestrial, or they may have been cable, but these are being supplemented all the time by new aspects. If we look at contribution, of course, you have a lot of mobile 3G, 4G, and looking towards 5G networks for contribution of video live and file. There are also a lot of satellite IP, high throughput platforms available, and people are using those for contribution now, IP-based satellite contribution networks. And we're going to hear what's happening in the satellite world, for instance, is from speakers we have later on, where Advantech will be talking about their latest generation amplifiers, their mobile VSAT hardware and stuff. And CCOM we have later talking about their new mobile VSAT equipment. In the platforms, there's a lot going on. Now, as a broadcast network becomes more complex, there's a lot of hybrid integration. There's a lot of cloud infrastructure coming in there. There's a lot of multi-platform, of over-the-top IPTV, video-on-demand type platforms being into the mix. A lot of this creates problems of how you manage these networks. These networks become more and more complex, harder to understand, let alone design and manage. And so the NMS and OSS people will be hearing from Skyline later that there's a big value in being able to manage and monetize these evolving platforms by managing the complexity. So people like Skyline, they will be coming along, and we'll be hearing a little bit more on them. What is also happening, another announcement, was that NetInsight, they make a Nimbra platform for transmission. I've bought Schedule All, or buying Schedule All, that are typically in the scheduling in the OSS space. So there's a lot of vertical integration going into the transmission players as well. Just like has been happening with the satellite providers, as they go into high throughput satellites and vertically integrate, providing services rather than bandwidth, the same thing is happening into the broadcast transmission platforms, not only satellite, but also IP and cable infrastructure. From one of our other speakers, NewTek, they will also be coming and talking about their dialogue platform on how a systems approach, instead of buying individual satellite equipment, buying a system, how that sort of equipment can help you manage a more complicated network for contribution and content exchange. Looking at the distribution space, satellite is still very much there for satellite TV, but it's also becoming more flexible and smarter. SES with their SAT-IP and with the partners on SAT-IP are converting DVB, traditional video, into IP video to have connected homes, to have home gateways. So we'll be looking at that sort of thing. And the smart LMBs from Eutelsat and their partners on how connectivity and return path will be needed to provide the modern catch-up TV services and connected services in the future. We will also be looking at more on the video distribution side as well. We will get some of our speakers will be looking at more on the cloud delivery of video, how other services, not only Amazon, but other services like the Deluxe Video Cloud, how they will be using cloud services to deliver video. And we will also be looking at other forms of video as well. Although TV as a video form is growing, video as a medium for other forms of communication is also growing. People are using marketing, enterprise videos. If a CEO of a massive multinational corporation wants to give a talk to his employees, typically they're pushing video out for distance training, distance learning. And we'll be hearing from Hub later on as well, from Entusat, of how video distribution is growing into other areas like streaming of events and so forth. Okay, so just to wrap up, the traditional broadcasting elements like satellite and cable and terrestrial are still there, and they are still vital enablers for the business, even if they sometimes get lost and people don't realize their importance. They are still very important, and they are still there, and still in the future they will stay there. Because the message that we gave last year remains the same. There's now video everywhere. So the total amount of video and the total monetization of the video moving around is grown enormous. And satellite, whereas before you used to have a big proportion of that market, although its relative market share is decreasing as there is cloud, as there is mobile data, the absolute market of satellite in broadcast remains buoyant and will continue to grow. So there is still a very optimistic outlook for satellite in the broadcast market in absolute terms. And it's changing, yes, but the changes of satellite, more efficiency, IP services, more innovative spot beam architectures, higher performance for higher efficiency, all those things are important, because what is driving a lot of the changes are the enablers again. So these technological advancements, together with making it economically feasible, are driving these new business opportunities, whether it's on streaming events, whether it's on these dispersed TV channels, whether it's on targeted advertising. So, as always, the broadcast market is changing even faster, and people have to adapt, because if you don't, you will die.